Get that black girl out of my courtroom, now! He said it like he was ordering someone to take out the trash.
Standing there with her canvas backpack, her chin up.
What the hell are you doing here, girl?
Grace didn't blink.
I am here to defend Mr. Ashford.
Carlton burst out laughing.
A black girl with a backpack defending a billionaire?
Grace looked him dead in the eyes.
You will wish you never asked what is in the backpack.
Is that a threat?
No, it's a promise.
Carlton stopped laughing, because what was inside that backpack was about to destroy everything he had ever built, and he didn't even see it coming. To understand what happened in that courtroom, you need to understand who Carlton Moore was, or at least who he thought he was. Carlton Moore was the chief operating officer of Ashford Moore Capital Holdings, one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. 54 years old, silver hair, custom suits. The kind of man who walked into every room like he owned it, because most of the time, he did. The firm was built by one man, Elias Ashford, a 68-year-old billionaire who started with nothing, built a fortune in commercial real estate, and spent the last decade quietly redirecting his wealth into community development, housing projects, scholarship funds, urban renewal in neighborhoods most investors wouldn't drive through, let alone invest in. Carlton hated every dollar of it. See, Carlton had been Elias's right hand for 15 years. He managed the money, he managed the board, and for 15 years, he watched Elias give away what Carlton believed should have been reinvested, or better yet, distributed to executives like himself. So when Elias announced plans to move $240 million into a community development trust, Carlton decided he'd had enough. He didn't confront Elias directly. That wasn't his style. Carlton was the kind of man who destroyed you with paperwork, not fists. So he did what powerful men do when they want to take something that isn't theirs. He went to court. Carlton filed a petition for emergency conservatorship. He claimed Elias Ashford was mentally incompetent, deteriorating, unable to make sound financial decisions. He told the court that Elias had fallen under the influence of, and this is the phrase he used, unqualified outside individuals who have manipulated a vulnerable elderly man for personal gain. He never said Grace Bennett's name. He didn't have to. Everyone in that courtroom knew exactly who he was talking about. Now, Carlton took the stand first, and if you didn't know any better, you would have believed every word he said. He sat in that witness chair like he was born in it, relaxed, confident. His attorney, Philip Crane, walked him through the testimony like they'd rehearsed it 100 times, because they had. Mr. Moore, can you describe for the court the changes you observed in Mr. Ashford's behavior over the past 18 months? Carlton nodded slowly, like it pained him to say it. It was gradual at first. Elias started missing board meetings. He became secretive about his finances. He stopped consulting with his senior team on major decisions. And then he began redirecting enormous sums of money, hundreds of millions, into projects that had no clear return on investment. And in your professional opinion, what caused these changes? Carlton paused, looked at the judge, then looked at the gallery, making sure every eye was on him. Elias fell under the influence of certain people who had no business being anywhere near a company of this size, people who saw an aging man with a large fortune and saw opportunity. He never looked at Grace when he said it. He didn't need to. The implication landed like a hammer. Crane kept pushing. And what steps did you take to protect the company? I did what any responsible executive would do, Carlton said. I froze the accounts that were being misused. I revoked building access for unauthorized personnel, and I filed this petition because someone had to protect Elias from himself. He said it with such conviction that a few people in the gallery actually nodded. That's how good he was. Carlton Moore could make theft sound like charity. But here's what Carlton didn't tell the court. He didn't mention that the psychiatric evaluation he submitted, the one declaring Elias mentally incompetent, was conducted by a doctor who happened to be Carlton's personal friend, a man named Dr. Gregory Sloan, who also happened to own shares in Ashford Moore Capital. Carlton paid for that evaluation. He chose the doctor. He got the result he wanted. He didn't mention the $18 million. Over the past 3 years, Carlton had quietly moved $18 million out of Ashford Moore Capital through a series of wire transfers. The money passed through 3 shell companies, all registered to addresses linked to his brother-in-law, Douglas Adams. The transfers were buried in operating expenses, labeled as consulting fees for companies that didn't exist. And he certainly didn't mention what he'd been writing in his emails. Internal messages to board members where he described Elias's community associates as street-level operators, where he called Grace Bennett the girl from the hood, where he wrote that the community trust was, and I want you to hear this clearly, a vanity project for people who don't understand capital. None of that came up during Carlton's testimony. Because Carlton Moore didn't take the stand to tell the truth. He took the stand to perform. And for the first hour, the performance was flawless. He described Grace as some girl who showed up one day with a backpack and never left. He told the court she had no verifiable legal background and no credentials of any kind. He said Elias had been foolish enough to hand over power of attorney to a complete stranger. And then he said something that would come back to haunt him. It was a throwaway line, the kind of thing a man like Carlton says without thinking because he's said it so many times it doesn't even register anymore. I've dealt with people like her before. He said it casually, almost bored, like swatting a fly. Grace was sitting at the plaintiff's table when he said it. She had a small notebook open in front of her. While Carlton talked, she wrote. Quietly, steadily. No reaction on her face. No anger, no hurt. Just a pen moving across paper. The narrator should understand something about that notebook. Grace wasn't journaling. She wasn't doodling. She was doing what she'd been trained to do at one of the best law schools in the world. She was building a case in real time, using Carlton's own words as the foundation. After Carlton said, "people like her," Grace wrote a single line in her notebook and underlined it twice. That line read, "He just confirmed 3 counts of fraud. Keep talking." Meanwhile, Elias Ashford sat in a wheelchair near the plaintiff's table. He was frail, thin wrists, hollowed cheeks, the look of a man whose body was slowing down even though his mind was sharp. When Carlton described him as mentally deteriorating, Elias's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the armrest. Grace reached over and placed her hand on his arm. Just for a moment. A small gesture, but the kind that said everything. "I'm here. I heard that, and I'm going to make it right." The judge, the Honorable Helen Caldwell, a 62-year-old woman with reading glasses and zero patience for theatrics, watched all of this without expression. She took notes. She asked no questions. She let Carlton talk. And Carlton kept talking. Because that's what men like Carlton do. They talk and talk and talk. And they mistake silence for agreement. They see a quiet room and think they've won. He had no idea that every word out of his mouth was another nail in his own coffin. And the woman with the backpack, the one he called some girl from the hood, she was sitting 3 feet away, building the case that would end him, one sentence at a time. When Carlton finally stepped down from the witness stand, he looked like a man who had just won. He straightened his tie, buttoned his jacket, and walked back to his seat with the kind of slow, deliberate stride that said, "That's how it's done." Philip Crane was already smiling. The gallery was murmuring. Everything was going exactly the way Carlton had planned. Then Judge Caldwell spoke. "The court will now hear from the representative of the plaintiff. Ms. Bennett, please take the stand." The murmuring stopped. Grace stood up slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't look at Carlton. She picked up her notebook, just the notebook, not the backpack, and walked to the witness stand like she'd done it 1,000 times. Crane was on his feet before she even sat down. Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to establish the qualifications of the individual claiming to represent Mr. Ashford. We have no record of Ms. Bennett's legal credentials, no bar registration, no firm affiliation. For all this court knows, she could be anyone. He said anyone the way you'd say nobody. Judge Caldwell looked at Grace. Ms. Bennett, would you like to respond? Grace adjusted the microphone. Her voice was calm, clear, not loud, not soft. The kind of voice that makes you lean in because you don't want to miss a single word. Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Ashford. I'd prefer to focus on the facts of this case rather than on me. Crane jumped on it. That's not an answer, Your Honor. I'm asking a direct question. Is Ms. Bennett a licensed attorney? Because if she's not, her presence at that table is a violation of court procedure, and everything she submits should be struck from the record. Grace didn't flinch. She turned to Crane and said, Counselor, I understand your concern, but my credentials are not what's on trial today. Mr. Moore's actions are. So if you'd like to discuss the frozen accounts, the revoked building access, or the conservatorship petition filed without Mr. Ashford's knowledge, I'm happy to start there. Crane opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Judge Caldwell. The judge's expression didn't change. The witness has offered to address the substance of the case, Mr. Crane. I suggest we let her. You'll have your chance to cross-examine. Proceed, Ms. Bennett. Grace nodded, and then she began. She spoke the way someone speaks when they've lived inside the facts for months, not reciting, not performing, just telling the truth in the order it happened. She told the court how she first met Elias Ashford. She was working as a community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit in East Baltimore, a neighborhood where half the buildings were boarded up and the other half were waiting to be. Elias's foundation had donated to the organization. One afternoon, Elias visited the site in person. No cameras, no entourage, just an old man in a wool coat who wanted to see where his money was going. Grace gave him a tour. They walked through a gutted row house that was being converted into affordable housing. Elias asked questions, real questions, not politician questions. He asked about redlining, about generational displacement, about why families who'd lived in the same neighborhood for 60 years were being priced out by developers who'd never set foot on the block. Grace answered every one, not because she'd memorized talking points, but because she'd grown up watching it happen. By the end of the tour, Elias sat down on a bench outside the row house and said, I've had 100 consultants tell me how to spend my money. You're the first person who told me where it actually needs to go. He asked her to consult on the Community Development Trust. She agreed. Over the next several months, they worked together, reviewing proposals, meeting with neighborhood leaders, building a framework for how $240 million could be deployed without displacing the people it was meant to help. That's when Carlton Moore started paying attention. Grace described it simply. The moment Mr. Moore realized that Mr. Ashford was serious about the trust, that the money was actually going to leave the firm, everything changed. Meetings I was invited to were suddenly rescheduled. Emails I was copied on stopped arriving. And then one morning, Mr. Ashford called me and said he couldn't get into his own building. His key card had been deactivated. His accounts had been frozen. And there was a legal filing he'd never seen, a petition to declare him mentally incompetent. The courtroom was silent. Crane tried to interrupt. Your Honor, this is a narrative, not testimony. I'd like to remind Ms. Bennett that she's under oath, not giving a speech. Grace looked at him. Everything I've said is under oath, Counselor. Would you like me to slow down so you can take notes? A sound came from the gallery, someone trying not to laugh. Crane's face turned red. Judge Caldwell didn't smile, but her eyes moved to Grace with something that wasn't there before. Interest. Then Grace did something no one expected. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit one document at this time." She opened her notebook and removed a single sheet, a notarized letter dated 6 months before Carlton filed the conservatorship petition. The letter was written by Elias Ashford. In it, he named Grace Bennett as his personal legal representative, granting her full power of attorney over his business and personal affairs. Crane shot out of his chair. "Your Honor, we were never provided this document in discovery." "Because it was filed under seal with the Maryland Probate Court," Grace said, "at Mr. Ashford's request. He anticipated that someone might try to challenge his competency, and he wanted to make sure his chosen representative had legal standing before that happened." She handed the letter to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to Judge Caldwell. The judge read it, slowly. Then she looked up. "This document appears to be in order. Ms. Bennett has legal standing as Mr. Ashford's designated representative. Objection overruled." Crane sat down. He didn't say another word. Carlton Moore, for the first time all morning, was not smiling. He leaned over to Crane and whispered something. Crane shook his head. And Grace just sat there, hands folded, notebook closed. The backpack still sitting on the counsel table behind her, untouched, unopened, waiting. She had answered every question without revealing a single thing about herself. She had established legal standing without saying the word lawyer. And she had done it all in a voice so steady it made Carlton's polished performance look like exactly what it was: an act. The courtroom didn't know who Grace Bennett was. Not yet. But they were starting to realize that whoever she was not the girl Carlton Moore said she was. The night before the trial, Grace Bennett was sitting on the floor of her apartment in East Baltimore. It was a one-bedroom, small, clean but small. The kind of place where the kitchen and the living room shared the same wall, and you could hear your neighbor's television through the ceiling. Law textbooks were stacked on the kitchen table next to a half-eaten plate of rice and beans. A laptop sat open on the floor, running financial analysis software, green numbers scrolling across a black screen. Around her, folders. Dozens of them. Printouts, bank statements, court filings, sticky notes with dates and dollar amounts. She had been building this case for 4 months, and tonight was the last night to get it right. But to understand why Grace Bennett was sitting on that floor, why she was the one carrying that backpack into a courtroom against a man like Carlton Moore, you need to understand where she came from. Grace was raised by her grandmother, Nora Taylor. Nora was a house cleaner, spent 40 years cleaning homes for wealthy white families on the eastern shore of Maryland. Big houses, beautiful houses, houses with kitchens bigger than Nora's entire apartment. She showed up at 6 in the morning, scrubbed floors on her hands and knees, folded laundry that cost more than her monthly rent, and left through the back door before the family came home for dinner. In 40 years, not one of those families ever offered her a glass of water. Grace was 9 when her parents died in a car accident on Route 50. Nora took her in that same week. Didn't hesitate, didn't complain, just cleared out the sewing room, put in a twin bed, and told Grace, "This is your room now, and you're going to be fine." Nora saved every dollar she could, skipped meals so Grace could have new shoes for school, took extra cleaning jobs on weekends so Grace could join the debate team. And every night, before Grace went to bed, Nora said the same thing. Let them finish talking, then show them the receipts. Grace didn't understand that phrase when she was 10. She understood it by the time she was 18. She earned a full scholarship to Howard University, graduated top of her class. Then Harvard Law, magna cum laude. Then an MBA from Wharton. She did all of it while Nora told the neighbors Grace was studying up north. No details, no bragging. Nora believed that power you announce is power you lose. Grace learned that lesson well. She stopped telling people about her degrees years ago. In her first job at a corporate law firm, she noticed something. Every time she mentioned Harvard, white colleagues didn't congratulate her. They questioned her. Affirmative action? Diversity admit? Must be nice to check a box. So she stopped mentioning it. She let her work do the talking, and the backpack became her filing system. Every case she ever won started in that bag. Now, on the floor of her apartment, she was building the most important file of her life. 3 categories, 3 folders, each one a nail in Carlton Moore's coffin. The first folder, financial forensics. Wire transfer records tracing $18 million from Ashford Moore Capital through 3 shell companies, all linked to Carlton's brother-in-law, Douglas Adams. Every transaction documented, every fake invoice highlighted. The second folder, communications. Printed emails from Carlton to board members. Emails where he called Elias's associates street-level operators. Emails where he referred to Grace as the girl from the hood. Emails where he dismissed the community trust as a waste of money on people who don't understand capital. The third folder, a sealed envelope. Inside it, the independent psychiatric evaluation of Elias Ashford, conducted by a board-certified neuropsychiatrist at Johns Hopkins. The evaluation that said Elias was fully competent. The evaluation that made Carlton's entire conservatorship petition a lie. Grace checked the clock. 11:42 p.m. The hearing was at 9 in the morning. She had 9 hours. She stacked the 3 folders, slid them into the canvas backpack, and zipped it shut. Then she opened the front flap and taped a photograph inside. A picture of Nora Taylor, standing in a white kitchen that wasn't hers, holding a mop, smiling at the camera like she had a secret nobody else knew. Grace zipped the backpack closed and whispered, "We're going to court, Grandma." Then she turned off the light. 9 o'clock the next morning, courtroom 6. Grace Bennett arrived 20 minutes early. She set the backpack on the counsel table, sat down, and didn't touch it. She just waited. Hands folded, eyes forward. Like a woman who had already played the entire game in her head and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Carlton Moore walked in at 8:58 with Philip Crane beside him. Fresh suit, fresh confidence. He glanced at Grace, then at the backpack, and smirked. He leaned over to Crane and said something that made Crane chuckle. They were still laughing when Judge Caldwell entered the courtroom. "Court is back in session. Ms. Bennett, you indicated yesterday that you had additional evidence to present. You may proceed." Grace stood. "Thank you, Your Honor." She walked to the counsel table and unzipped the backpack. The sound of that zipper cut through the courtroom like a blade. Slow, deliberate. Every eye in the room followed her hands. She removed the first manila folder, set it on the table, then the second, then the third. She stacked them neatly, one on top of the other, and turned to face the judge. Carlton's smirk faded. Not gone, not yet, but fading. Like a man who just noticed smoke but hasn't found the fire. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with the psychiatric evaluation submitted by Mr. Moore's legal team. The evaluation that forms the entire basis of his conservatorship petition." She opened the first folder. Mr. Moore submitted an evaluation conducted by Dr. Gregory Sloan, concluding that Mr. Ashford suffers from significant cognitive decline and is unfit to manage his own affairs. She paused. What Mr. Moore did not disclose to this court is that Dr. Sloan is a personal friend of his. They've vacationed together in the Outer Banks 3 times in the last 5 years. I have the hotel receipts. She placed the receipts on the evidence table. What Mr. Moore also did not disclose is that Dr. Sloan is a shareholder in Ashford Moore Capital Holdings. He owns 11,000 shares, currently valued at approximately $680,000. She placed the shareholder records next to the receipts. In other words, Your Honor, the doctor who declared Mr. Ashford incompetent has a direct financial interest in Mr. Moore gaining control of the company. He is not an independent evaluator. He is a business partner. The courtroom exhaled. Not a gasp, something quieter. The sound of 40 people realizing at the same time that they'd been lied to. Grace wasn't done. 6 months ago, Mr. Ashford, anticipating exactly this kind of challenge, commissioned his own psychiatric evaluation. It was conducted by Dr. Howard Sloan, no relation, a board-certified neuropsychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center with 31 years of clinical experience. She removed the sealed envelope from the folder, opened it, and handed the document to the bailiff. Dr. Howard Sloan's evaluation concludes, and I quote the summary line, "Mr. Ashford demonstrates no clinical indicators of cognitive decline. His reasoning, memory, and executive function are consistent with a man of his age in excellent mental health." Judge Caldwell read the evaluation. Her eyebrows rose, just slightly, but enough. She looked at Carlton Moore. Then she looked at Crane. "Mr. Crane, were you aware of Dr. Gregory Sloan's financial relationship with your client?" Crane hesitated. "Your Honor, Dr. Sloan is a respected—" "That's not what I asked. Were you aware?" Crane said nothing. Judge Caldwell removed her glasses. "The court will strike Dr. Gregory Sloan's evaluation from the record pending a full review of his independence. Ms. Bennett, continue." Crane requested a sidebar. Judge Caldwell didn't even look at him. "You had your chance to present, counselor. Now sit down." Crane sat. Grace opened the second folder. "Your Honor, over the past 3 years, Mr. Carlton Moore authorized a series of wire transfers totaling $18 million from Ashford Moore Capital Holdings. The transfers were categorized internally as consulting fees." She placed the first set of bank statements on the evidence table. The fees were paid to 3 companies, Ridgeline Advisory Group, Crestwood Partners LLC, and Bridger Capital Consulting. All 3 are registered in Delaware. She placed the incorporation documents next to the bank statements. Ridgeline Advisory Group is registered to 4412 Hamden Lane, Wilmington, Delaware. Crestwood Partners LLC is registered to 4412 Hamden Lane, Wilmington, Delaware. Bridger Capital Consulting is registered to— She paused and looked at Carlton. 4412 Hamden Lane, Wilmington, Delaware. The same address, all 3 companies, the same address. That address, Your Honor, is the home of Douglas Adams, Mr. Moore's brother-in-law. She placed a property deed on the table. Then a family record showing Douglas Adams married to Carlton Moore's sister. Then 3 years of wire transfer confirmations, each one highlighted in yellow. Grace narrated the money trail the way a professor explains gravity to first-year students. No drama, no anger, just facts laid end to end until the weight of them was undeniable. $18 million moved from the company to 3 shell companies, all at the same address, all linked to Mr. Moore's family. No services were rendered. No deliverables were produced. No contracts exist. This is not consulting, Your Honor. This is embezzlement. Carlton Moore's leg was bouncing under the table. His hand went to his tie. He loosened it, just half an inch, but in a courtroom, half an inch is a confession. Grace opened the third folder. "Finally, Your Honor, I'd like to present a selection of internal communications authored by Mr. Moore." She handed printed emails to the bailiff. Each one was projected on a screen mounted on the courtroom wall. The first email, Carlton to a board member regarding Elias's community associates. "We need to get these street-level operators away from Elias before they bleed the fund dry." The second email, Carlton to the head of HR. "The girl from the hood is back in the building again. Find out who's letting her in and shut it down." The third email, Carlton to 3 board members regarding the Community Development Trust. "This is a vanity project for people who don't understand capital. Elias is throwing our money at a neighborhood that will never produce a return." Each email appeared on the screen. Each one hung in the silence. And with each one, the courtroom got quieter. The kind of quiet that happens when people realize they're witnessing something they won't forget. Grace let the silence sit. She didn't comment on the emails. She didn't editorialize. She let the words speak for themselves. Because words like street-level operators and the girl from the hood don't need a translator. Then she turned to look at Elias Ashford. The old man was sitting in his wheelchair with his eyes closed. Not sleeping, not defeated, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and someone finally takes it off your shoulders. He reached over and took Grace's hand. He held it for 3 seconds. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He had trusted the right person. And now the whole room knew it. Carlton Moore sat at the defense table, whispering to Crane. Crane shook his head. Carlton whispered again, more urgently. Crane shook his head again. There was nowhere to go. The psychiatric evaluation was struck. The money trail was on the table. The emails were on the screen. And the woman with the backpack was just getting started. Philip Crane was a desperate man, and desperate men make desperate moves. He stood up before Judge Caldwell could speak. His voice was louder than it needed to be. The voice of a man trying to fill a room with noise because the facts had already left him empty. Your Honor, I must raise a formal objection. Judge Caldwell looked at him over her glasses. On what grounds, Mr. Crane? On the grounds of standing, Your Honor. Ms. Bennett has presented documents, cross-referenced financial records, and cited psychiatric evaluations. Yet at no point during these proceedings has she established that she is a licensed attorney. She has refused to state her qualifications. She has dodged every question about her credentials. And with all due respect to this court, if she is not a member of the bar, then everything she has presented is inadmissible, and this court has been misled. He sat down like he'd just played his ace. The gallery stirred. Murmurs. Whispers, heads turning. Even Judge Caldwell paused, because the objection procedurally was legitimate. A non-attorney cannot present evidence in a case of this magnitude. If Grace wasn't a lawyer, the entire case could collapse. Carlton Moore leaned back in his chair. For the first time in an hour, something close to a smile returned to his face. This was it. This was the kill shot. Judge Caldwell turned to Grace. Ms. Bennett, the objection raises a valid procedural question. Before we continue, I need you to state your credentials for the record. The courtroom went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling. Grace stood. She didn't speak immediately. She smoothed her blazer, the $11 thrift store blazer, and looked at Crane. Then she looked at Carlton. Then she turned to the judge. Of course, Your Honor. She walked to the counsel table. She reached into the backpack one last time, and she pulled out a leather portfolio, old, creased, soft from years of handling. The kind of thing you carry when what's inside matters more than what's outside. She opened it, removed 3 documents, handed them to the bailiff. The bailiff carried them to Judge Caldwell. The first document, a Juris Doctor degree from Harvard Law School, magna cum laude. The second, a Master of Business Administration from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. The third, an active membership card with the Maryland State Bar Association. And clipped to the back of it, a certificate of admission to practice before the United States Supreme Court. Judge Caldwell read each document, slowly, one by one. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the paper moving in her hands. Then she looked up. Objection overruled. She paused. Ms. Bennett's credentials are more than sufficient. Proceed. The gallery didn't murmur this time. Someone in the 3rd row said it out loud. Oh my God. Someone behind them whispered, Are you serious? A woman near the back put her hand over her mouth. Carlton Moore stared at Grace like he was seeing a ghost. His mouth opened slightly. No words came out. The smirk was gone. The confidence was gone. Everything he had assumed about the woman sitting across from him, every judgment he'd made the moment she walked in with that backpack, collapsed in 5 seconds. Philip Crane looked down at his notes. He didn't look up again for a long time. Grace turned to face Crane. Her voice was quiet, controlled, almost gentle, which made it worse. "You asked me where I keep my legal briefs, counselor. Now you know." She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or pump her fist or look at the gallery for applause. She just stood there, 5'6", thrift store blazer, canvas backpack, and let the silence do what silence does best. It told the truth. They had spent 2 days calling her the girl with the backpack, the black girl who didn't belong, the one who should have been checked at the metal detector, the one with the welfare check and a prayer. She was the most qualified person in that courtroom, and she had let every single one of them underestimate her, because that was the strategy. Judge Caldwell called a 10-minute recess after the reveal. People needed it. The gallery was buzzing, strangers turning to strangers, shaking their heads, mouthing "Harvard" to each other like they still couldn't believe it. Carlton Moore spent those 10 minutes whispering to Philip Crane. Crane kept shaking his head. Carlton's whispers got louder. Crane's head shook harder. Whatever Carlton wanted to do, his own lawyer was telling him no. It didn't matter, because when court resumed, it wasn't Carlton's turn anymore. It was Grace's. "Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine Mr. Moore." Judge Caldwell nodded. "Granted. Mr. Moore, please retake the stand." Carlton stood. He buttoned his jacket. A reflex, the muscle memory of a man who'd spent his life performing control. But his hands fumbled on the second button. A small thing, but in a courtroom, small things are everything. He sat down in the witness chair. Grace walked toward him carrying one thing, the notebook. The same small notebook she'd been writing in since the first day of testimony. The one everyone assumed was just notes. It wasn't just notes. Grace opened it and looked at Carlton the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. No emotion, just precision. "Mr. Moore, in your 12 years as Chief Operating Officer of Ashford Moore Capital, how many black professionals were promoted to senior positions within the firm?" Crane stood. "Objection. Relevance." Judge Caldwell didn't hesitate. "The plaintiff has alleged racial animus as a motivating factor in Mr. Moore's actions. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Moore." Carlton shifted in his seat. "We promoted several qualified individuals during my tenure. The firm has always been committed to—" "How many, Mr. Moore? I'm asking for a number." "I don't have the exact—" "I do." Grace reached into the backpack, one last folder tucked against the side like she'd been saving it. She opened it and placed a stack of HR records on the evidence table. In 12 years, under Mr. Moore's direct oversight, 14 black employees held positions above administrative assistant at Ashford Moore Capital. Every single one was either terminated or demoted. Not one was promoted. 14 people, 12 years, 0 promotions. She read 3 names aloud, slowly, giving each one weight. Each name was a person. Each person had a story. And each story ended the same way, with Carlton Moore signing off on their removal. Carlton's voice tightened. Those were performance-based decisions. Were they? Grace flipped a page in her notebook. "Mr. Moore, during your testimony yesterday, you used a phrase I wrote down. You said, and I'm reading your exact words, 'I've dealt with people like her before.' Can you tell the court who people like her refers to?" Carlton's jaw locked. "I meant people without proper qualifications." "People without proper qualifications," Grace repeated. She let the words hang. Then she picked up another document from the folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a written deposition from Rebecca Sloan, a former senior analyst at Ashford Moore Capital." Rebecca Sloan was white. She worked at the firm for 6 years. She quit in 2023. Her deposition explained why. Grace read the key passage aloud. Rebecca described a meeting where Carlton told a black analyst, a man with an MBA from Columbia and 8 years of experience, "You should be grateful you're even in this building." Rebecca said she filed an internal complaint. The complaint disappeared. The analyst was terminated 2 weeks later. Grace closed the deposition. "Mr. Moore, would you like to respond to Miss Sloan's account?" Carlton's voice cracked for the first time. He leaned forward. His face was red. "This has nothing to do with race." Grace didn't flinch. Her voice stayed level, so level it made his outburst sound like a confession. "Then explain the numbers, Mr. Moore, because the numbers don't lie, and they don't care about your intentions." Carlton opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at Crane. Crane was staring at the table. Judge Caldwell called a 15-minute recess. The gallery emptied slowly. People standing in the hallway, talking in low voices, processing what they'd just witnessed. At the plaintiff's table, Elias Ashford looked at Grace. He was too far away for anyone else to hear, but Grace saw his lips move. 2 words. "Thank you." Grace nodded. Once. Then she opened her notebook and turned to a clean page. She wasn't done yet. When court resumed for the final time, something had changed in the room. You could feel it. The energy was different. The gallery was full. People who had stepped out for the recess came back with others. Word had spread. Bailiffs brought in extra chairs. Carlton Moore sat at the defense table looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 days. His tie was loose. His jacket was unbuttoned. He wasn't whispering to Crane anymore. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there staring at the table, waiting for it to be over. Judge Caldwell called for closing arguments. Philip Crane went first. He stood up slowly, and for the first time in the trial, he didn't look confident. He looked tired. "Your Honor, Mr. Moore is a dedicated executive who has given 15 years of his career to Ashford Moore Capital. Every decision he made was in good faith, with the best interests of the company and its shareholders in mind. The financial transactions in question were legitimate consulting arrangements. The psychiatric evaluation was conducted by a licensed professional, and Mr. Moore's concerns about Mr. Ashford's well-being were genuine. The concerns of a man who cared about his colleague and his company." He paused. He looked at the judge. He looked at the gallery. He had nothing else. "We ask the court to grant the conservatorship petition and allow Mr. Moore to continue his stewardship of Ashford Moore Capital." He sat down. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. No fire, no conviction. Just words arranged in the shape of an argument with nothing holding them up. Then Grace stood. No notes, no folders, no backpack, just her. She walked to the center of the courtroom and faced Judge Caldwell. She didn't rush. She let the silence settle first, the way a musician lets a rest breathe before the final note. "Your Honor, this case was never about one man's mental competency. Elias Ashford is competent. The independent evaluation from Johns Hopkins confirms it. His own actions confirm it. A man who had the foresight to secure power of attorney, to commission his own psychiatric evaluation, and to prepare for exactly this kind of attack, is not a man in cognitive decline. He is a man who knew he was being betrayed and planned accordingly." She took 1 step forward. "This case is about what happens when a man like Carlton Moore decides that he knows better. Better than the founder of the company, better than the man who built it from nothing, better than the communities that company was finally beginning to serve. Mr. Moore didn't file this petition because he was worried about Elias Ashford. He filed it because he was worried about himself, because $240 million was about to go somewhere he couldn't touch it, and $18 million he'd already stolen was about to be discovered." She paused. let it land. Mr. Moore embezzled $18 million through shell companies registered to his own brother-in-law. He manufactured a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation using a doctor who is both his personal friend and a company shareholder. And he executed a 12-year pattern of racial discrimination that silenced, demoted, or terminated every black professional who challenged his authority. 14 people whose careers were destroyed so that Mr. Moore could operate without accountability. Grace looked at Carlton. He didn't look back. Your Honor, this case isn't about one man's greed. It's about what happens when power assumes it will never be questioned, and what happens when someone shows up with the receipts. She turned back to Judge Caldwell. I asked the court to deny the conservatorship petition, to restore Mr. Ashford's full authority over his company and assets, and to refer this matter to the appropriate authorities for criminal investigation. She sat down. The courtroom didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't whisper. Judge Caldwell removed her glasses. She set them on the bench. She looked at Carlton Moore for a long moment. Then she spoke. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Mr. Ashford retains full control of his company, his assets, and his affairs. She paused. The court is referring Mr. Carlton Moore to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and the filing of a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. Another pause. The court is additionally referring this matter to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for investigation of systemic racial discrimination at Ashford Moore Capital Holdings. She put her glasses back on and looked at Grace. Ms. Bennett, the court thanks you for your thoroughness and professionalism. This bench does not often see advocacy of this caliber. And I will note, for the record, that the objections raised against your standing were, in retrospect, the most telling evidence of all. Two bailiffs approached Carlton Moore. He stood before they reached him. His tie was hanging loose. His face was gray. They walked him toward the side door, and as he passed the plaintiff's table, he stopped. For 1 second, he looked at Grace. Grace looked back. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Carlton Moore disappeared through the door. Behind her, Elias Ashford gripped the arms of his wheelchair. Slowly, painfully, carefully, he stood up. The courtroom watched. No one helped him. No one needed to. He extended his hand to Grace. She took it. His voice was quiet, but the room was so still that everyone heard it. My attorneys told me I was foolish to trust you. I told them I was foolish not to trust you sooner. Grace held his hand. She didn't say anything, she just nodded. The way you nod when the work speaks and the words aren't necessary. The gavel came down. Court was adjourned. And the girl with the backpack had just won. 6 months later, Carlton Moore was indicted on 8 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. His assets were frozen. His passport was seized. The country club where he'd spent every Sunday morning for 20 years revoked his membership, not out of principle, but because the other members didn't want to be seen with him. His wife filed for divorce before the indictment was made public. She'd known about Douglas Adams and the shell companies for years. She just didn't care until the money stopped flowing. The EEOC investigation took 4 months. When it was finished, Ashford Moore Capital was ordered to pay $34 million in settlements to former employees, including the 14 black professionals Carlton had forced out over 12 years. 14 people who had been told they weren't good enough, weren't qualified enough, weren't the right fit. 14 people who now had proof that the only thing wrong with them was the color of their skin. Grace Bennett was profiled in national legal publications. The headlines all said some version of the same thing. The woman with the backpack who took down a corporate empire. She received invitations to speak at Howard, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown. She accepted one, Howard, her alma mater. She declined the rest. Instead, she went home, back to East Baltimore. back to the neighborhood where her grandmother had cleaned houses for 40 years. And she opened a legal clinic on the same block where Nora Taylor used to catch the bus to work at 5 in the morning. She called it the Nora Taylor Justice Center. The clinic specialized in two things: employment discrimination and corporate fraud. Within 3 months, it had a waiting list. Within 6 months, it had a staff of 4 attorneys, all of them young, all of them black, all of them carrying backpacks. Elias Ashford restructured the board of Ashford Moore Capital. He implemented mandatory diversity requirements for all senior hiring, and he funded the Nora Taylor Justice Center with a $10 million endowment. When a reporter asked him why he trusted Grace Bennett, he said, "Because she was the only person in the room who cared more about the truth than about what I was worth." One afternoon, about a year after the trial, Grace was sitting at her desk in the clinic. The door opened. A young black girl walked in, maybe 12 years old, school uniform, braids, and a backpack hanging off one shoulder. She'd been suspended from school. Her teacher told her she'd never amount to anything. She talked back. The school called it defiance. The girl called it the truth. Grace looked at the girl, looked at the backpack, and smiled. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me everything. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked and proved them dead wrong? Or have you ever watched it happen to someone else and wished you'd said something? Tell me in the comments." If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because next week we're telling the story of a janitor who walked into a boardroom and exposed a $1 billion lie. You won't believe what he had in his pocket. Some legacies start with a mop and end with a verdict.